Kelly. Hey, Kelly.
Yes. Shannon?
Can you talk?
Yes, I'm talking.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Talking.
Connecting into the system.
We can't hear Kelly though.
Yeah, that's weird. I can keep talking.
I just got back from the fall.
Thanks.
I just got over my.
Okay. Seems like the room doesn't have audio yet, so we're just trying to wait until they can.
Okay, folks, let's get started here.
Okay, one moment though. Right, no, we got to make sure we can hear Kelly in the world room.
Okay, so I'm still talking. Sorry for those listening to me talk.
Okay, can you keep talking, Kelly? I just got to adjust the volume.
Okay, I'm still talking at my regular volume. Great to see you all, and thanks for being here. And I'm glad some students have been able to make it, and of course our faculty and staff and students. We're all jamming. I think some staff, board members are here too. Is that enough talking now?
Yeah. Kelly, thank you very much for your sound check. I want to welcome everybody. This is the March 4th Tuesday meeting. And with March, we are going to start a 2-month sequence that's going to be focusing on our SDLCs. This session, we will be talking about the Appalachia SDLC. Before we do, however, I do want to introduce a new person who is sitting at the table here, who's a member of our Board of Trustees, Lucy Mcneill. If you want to turn the camera, and so Lucy, there's a mic there in front of you if you want to welcome yourself, but Lucy has just flew in last night from England and she will be here this week. Without Lucy, a few words to the people all around the world. I don't see the full screen up.
Hello, everybody. I'm a little jet lagged today, but I'm excited to be here and see what you're doing.
The other thing I just want to say to everybody before we turn it over to Luke, who will introduce the Appalachian SDLC. We do have several new people also, which Luke will introduce, part of the Appalachian team. I've just come back from a trip through the American West, in Colorado and California especially, where I've had a number of high-level discussions with individuals. And the conclusion that I've come back with is very timely for the fact that right now we are beginning the functional analysis that will then lead into the planning for next fiscal year and will also lead into some important times of the transitional adjustment as I leave a year from now as president. What Future Generations offers in community-based engagement and adaptation is ever more needed in the world today. With the very sad events that are happening politically in Europe, with the climate change issues that last month, even the IPCC announced that climate change has now passed the tipping point. The chances of avoiding a major climate disruption, the IPCC says is now, we've missed the mark in 2021. With the issues of the global pandemic that is going to be with us for quite some time, with issues of ineffective governance. The answer to all of these is community. And it's the answer for communities to develop a resilient capacity for how to engage the future. There's a lot of possibilities, a lot of potential in the future. I'm not trying to say that this is panic time. I'm trying to say this is time for the types of solutions of research and learning and action that Future Generations is actively engaged with. We have a footprint now in 43 countries. We have a methodology in seed scale. And I believe that what we're going to see here unfolding in the next several months is a new understanding of the role of Future Generations. and university and all of our partners around the world. And as an example of that, I do want to turn it over to Luke to introduce the Appalachian SDLC as a concrete example, but expect it, folks, that in the coming fourth Tuesdays, we'll have a lot more of these types of examples, because Future Generations is actively at work. We're not just talking, we're actually doing this stuff. We're developing new models and figuring out modes of adaptation. So welcome everybody to the March 4th Tuesday presentation. Luke, over to you.
Thanks, Daniel. And I will try to be brief because I am not, I'm just introducing today. I think we decided that to present the work in Appalachia, historically, everybody hears me talk about it, and it's important. We have a really big team now in Appalachia. So we wanted to get some of the other voices forward, specifically talking about some of our historical work and really setting the stage for where we're headed in the future, as we really do make this evolution from having started as an education project and then rapidly became a research project. Many folks still remember the days when we were just the Maple Initiative. And so what we're going to be talking about today is really the story of how we started with that early work in Maple and evolved into something much bigger. But if we could go to next slide. So I just wanted to do a brief overview of just a reminder of where we are as of the 2019 strategic plan, which created the Community Engagement Division, really with the mandate of creating sustainable SDLCs, a terminology that has evolved from Sustainable Development Learning Centers originally to its current usage of Sustainable Development Learning Chapters. And I'll just draw attention that on this slide, this is started as a typo. And then when I went to fix it, I kind of said, wait a minute, Sustainable Development Learning Communities is actually really where the whole idea has been evolving now over the past 3 years. And that's really because, and without getting hung up on what the actual acronym stands for, we know that SDLC has a very specific mandate or mission in the strategic plan. And that the Community Engagement Division carries. And that's to create regional networks of action, learning, and experimentation. In seed scale terminology, this is scale squared. We know those of you who are up on your seed scale training know that scale squared tends to be the most elusive and hardest form of scaling up to occur. It's also the most important based on all of our global literature. So it's really important that, in keeping with the original seed scale task force of how scaling up occurs and why, that's really that pursuit of that overall question that started Future Generations continues to propel the SDLCs forward. Okay, the approach that has really been coming forward that you'll hopefully be seeing showcased both in this presentation and hopefully next month we'll be hearing from the Nepal SDLC is that growth occurs through nurturing local partnerships through coordination and facilitation to support local human-centered development. This is really important in our evolving work now of 30 years of Future Generations. It's been really clear that we don't lead. We support, we enable, we facilitate. These are the functions, if even going back to seed scale, that are essential, and we know this. And so we have challenges. How do we lay an administrative structure into this sort of thing? But it's important to really understand that that's our mandate, is propelling local partnerships that can work together. The Community Engagement Division, from this standpoint, and what the SDLCs aim to do is bring synergy between community engagement and academics at the university level. And because together we're in pursuit of this quest for effective and sustainable human adaptation to in the face of impending climate change. We need to constantly be thinking about how our mission and how our vision relate to the current world. And right now we know that climate change is the pandemic and climate change. We're facing an uncertain future, and Future Generations University is really can be and should be a university both of and for the future in terms of its design and what we're preparing things for. So I see that my final bullet, I meant to delete that entire thing. So we're just going to skip on past that. And So just briefly, having evolved from a phone call that Mike Reckling gave me one day and said, Luke, we should run a training program in maple syrup, to having just two of us. We now have an ever-growing team at in the Appalachian program that's really emerged as a very new team, but a great team, and really excited. I want to congratulate this whole team for a huge success coming off of this year's Maple season, Maple Days, Maple Fest. It was a tremendous success. We should be on the front page of the local newspaper for the 4th week in a row this week. So good job, everyone. Specifically, I want to welcome Joey Alloy to our team. Joey's not here with us today in person, but hopefully signing on remotely. And Joey is coming on as our Appalachian Agroforestry Network Coordinator, and will be really helping to spearhead and coordinate the direction of a lot of our partnership work and development going forward. Also with us in the room today is Heather Harper, who is joining us as the administrative assistant for the Appalachian team, and will be probably most of you all, the first face most people see from now on when you walk into the office. So make sure to greet Heather, and we're really excited to have both of them joining the team. So to hand off today's formal presentation, I want to introduce Jenny Totten, who is our strategy and impact manager, and she'll be presenting today, as well as our very own and longest serving staff member, the one and only Kate Photos, who is coming off of a grueling 3 months, creating a huge success, spearheading all of our field work. And it's over to you, ladies. I'm really looking forward to the presentation, but that's why we're here. I just wanted to provide a little context, and now we'll hear about our journey from Maple onward. And I'll turn it over to Kate.
Out. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
You're frozen, Kate.
Hi, everybody. Very sorry. The internet on my computer, which was upstairs in the office, dropped. So we'll see if it reconnects here soon. Woo. Exciting times up on the mountain. Well, yeah, we are the Appalachian team, and as Luke said, I'm one of the longest serving members, which is funny because I'm also the youngest. But oh, well, I guess Scruff has been around for longer. It's true. There we go. Actually, yeah, that's true. You did. Haha. He is younger. Well, now. Here we go. Here's the PowerPoint back. Can y'all hear me? Sweet. Awesome. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. So why maple syrup? Why did it start here? And there is a couple reasons, one of which is it is part of the history of the region. Another one is there's local history in Franklin. There's documented success and available resources, and also a stated need. Maple syrup was something that already had a lot of interest coming out of landowners in the region, but very little support beyond sort of what was available on YouTube at the time. So let's talk a little bit about how it's part of the history of the region. If you come to West Virginia, or if you live around here, there are many things named Sugar Camp, Sugar Creek, Sugar Grove, Sugar Tree, Sugar Valley, and these all refer to maple syrup making. It is really part of the history of Appalachia. It was a way for people to create their own sugar in a time where getting sugar into these remote areas was pretty difficult and pretty pricey. So as you can see, there's sort of a lot of regional history surrounding maple syrup. And there's also local history. So these are the Dahmer women, and this was taken about 10 or 20 minutes from the office, about 5 minutes from McCoy's mill, if any of you have been there. And this is them making their annual sugar supplies from maple syrup. They have 3 large heavy cast iron cauldrons over an open fire, and they're ladling sap from one to the next with this ladle right there. And the cool thing is this is still in the community, and it's actually been at some of our events, this very ladle. So that's pretty sweet. Thanks, Johan. Somebody appreciates my humor. Oh, that's fun. So then there's also documented success and available resources. So before we even really got involved, there were producers in the state. There were people making maple syrup in the state of West Virginia. Some of our longest running ones are over 100 years in operation in this very area, which is pretty impressive. We also have a pretty substantial resource. As you can see on the map on the left, there's actually a pretty impressive distribution of sugar maples across the state, and that doesn't even include red maples. So we're working with an industry that has its foot in the door and definitely has room to grow. So, and lastly, we had people stating a need. We had people stating a need for an agricultural product that is produced in their off season. So maple syrup, for those of you who don't know, is a late winter, early spring crop, and that for most people is a downtime on their farm. So they wanted a way to continue producing and being profitable even in those months. They wanted a way to make money from an unused part of their property or unused parts of their property. So this basically means maple syrup is often made off some very steep hillsides. Those hillsides you're not going to plant on, you're not going to be able to graze on. So for a lot of people, it's just this standing woodlot that isn't doing much for them. And then for some people, they just wanted an economic justification for a reason to leave their forest standing. They wanted some way to justify just letting the trees grow and be, but still being able to turn a bit of a profit. So sort of our beginnings, we started really with just a little bit of producer outreach and support. And then one of our first major grants was actually in research in alternative products. So looking at walnut sap, sycamore sap, birch sap, and looking at ways that our maple producers can use the equipment they already own to make another product and thereby make more money. We also started doing some research into increased production. How do we take the tapping you're already doing and make it more productive and more profitable? And then we're also looking into new technologies. So because we are in the southern tier of maple syrup making, and also because of the makeup of our landscape and property divisions, we actually have a lot of small scale producers, and a lot of the companies out there that are currently making maple equipment are mostly focusing their technology development on large scale producers. So we kind of hopped in to fill that niche a little bit too. And we've done a lot of resource creation. So this is just a small snapshot of the research papers we've printed, the handbooks we've made, the designs we've released. On top of this, we have webinars, and we have video recordings, and we have tutorials, and we have kids activities. There's a lot out there that we've created to kind of release into the community, and it's all open access and free, which is pretty great. And then what really began the kickoff and the growth of the industry is really when we had a producer who's actually pretty local to this county, Mark Bowers, come up to Mike Recklin and Luke and say, I want to make a association, because by making an association, we can increase the number of resources, we can share our knowledge, it'll provide us some grant access to some maple specific grants, and it will give us a little bit more footing in the door of the WVDA. And so they formed, I think, how many years ago? It was 6? Yeah. 6 years ago. Yeah. In 2016, they formed the West Virginia Maple Syrup Producers Association. And on the left is their old logo. And then on the right is actually their new logo that was able to be created through some grant funding they were able to have access to and a marketing company that they worked with. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, and from here, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Jenny.
All right. Hi, everybody. So I saw a question about grant funding. We'll actually go through as the rest of the presentation goes forward. We'll talk about what is funding what. So the Producers Association formation was funded mostly by a grant to the Producers Association, which was a specialty crop grant from the Department of Agriculture. And so our state Department of Ag gives out so much money a year to basically push niche specialty crops forward. And so maple is one of those. And the Department of Agriculture's definition of a specialty crop is literally basically anything that's not wheat or potatoes or a commodity crop. And so maple always counts. So by this point, we have folks that are organized. We have producers that are working together to kind of better their resources and build relationships. But what we don't have is access to larger markets. And so in West Virginia, we're not a state with a lot of disposable income. And so our farmers here have a hard time earning money and you very rarely can you sell value-added products at a price premium. And so one of the best ways to sort of earn more income is to find a way to get your products out of the state. We focus on value added because those are shelf stable in a lot of cases, right? So for example, a raw cucumber will only last about a week, but if you turn it into pickles, you can have roughly a year. And so maple syrup, of course, is value added and is very shelf stable. And so what we found was that our individual producers themselves could not access larger markets. They could not access out-of-state markets. They couldn't even produce enough syrup that would be considered for a pickup to get products from within the state to out of the state. And so there's a line of funding from the United States Department of Agriculture that is specifically for the maple syrup industry. And so it's Acer Funding. And so what we did was we are using current Acer funding to build a brand that is kind of this commingling of a lot of individual producers in West Virginia syrup. We're building it as Authentic Appalachia. And so by commingling this and bottling it all together, we have a larger amount of syrup, which can then be utilized to access markets outside of the state. In particular, what we're trying to do is we know that we're not going to compete with Vermont. We know that we're not going to compete with Canada. We're not here to compete with those two markets. What we want to do is provide a really high quality syrup that is used in a lot of cases in culinary use. So for folks that are basically chefs at restaurants and also in smaller grocery stores around the region, so in the larger Appalachia region. And so our syrup tastes a little different than the Northeast syrups. And so by kind of targeting Southern markets and targeting Central Appalachian markets, we have some success. And so just this past year, so the first run of Authentic Appalachia syrup went out earlier this year, so in January, with syrup that was bottled from the 2021 season. And so it took a while to get there because it sounds simple, right? Just get all the syrup in one spot, bottle it, and get it somewhere else. It's not that simple, right? So our geographies are crazy. Getting from point A to point B could take hours. Trying to figure out logistics of moving syrup from Maryland down to Southwest Virginia, all sorts of things have happened. So our team got really stubborn and kept working with partners until we came up with a solution. And we're still massaging that solution, but at least we have syrup on trucks going places, and that was the goal. All right, so we now have syrup. One step, we have syrup outside of the state that's being sold. the next step is how do we create more consumers of syrup within the state and really within the region? And so one of the easiest ways to do this is just by engaging the community in all kinds of fun activities. And so these are some pictures from some of our activities that I'll talk about later, but we do kids activities. So we will set up we've set up at Sugar Shacks and set up actually on farm to show kids how to tap. We work with our producers to do outreach days. We have a mobile, we call it the SAP Mobile. It's a mobile sugar shack that we take to community events that is an education piece that teaches kind of all about the syrup industry and how to actually take sap and turn it into syrup. And then here's some pictures from more of our outreach days. We also do community education days for adults as well. We don't just hang out with kids. And so here's some pictures from that. And then the final one is the Mountain State Maple Days that just happened. So Saturday was the second Maple Days this year, and I will talk more about that later, but it's basically like a statewide celebration of maple syrup over a 2-day period at the beginning of the season and at the end of the season. So as part of engaging the community, what we've done is we've hit the fair and festival circuit pretty hard the last couple of years. So here's a couple of pictures from that. We set up at the State Fair of West Virginia, which is a 10-day state fair that's held in the southern part of the state. It's held down in Lewisburg, or right outside of Lewisburg. And so the SAP Mobile set up there. The nice thing about the state fair is a lot of folks are coming there to look at the bunnies, to look at the largest squash, to get their kids excited about agriculture. And so having a maple trailer front and center helps folks realize that maple is also an agricultural product. And so that is like where we reach a large audience. Mountain State Maple Days, I alluded to a little bit earlier. So the third weekend of the third Saturday of February and then the third Saturday of March are both designated as Mountain State Maple Days. And so what that does is that lets us hit, West Virginia's climate is weird. So I live in the southern part of the state and we hit 80 degrees today. Franklin and the northern part of the state, you're still sort of making maple syrup around this time. And so what had to happen was we picked dates, the Syrup Producers Association chose dates so that the entire state could benefit from a maple celebration. And so in February and March, not all of them, but several sugar shacks and several maple producers actually open up to the public so that folks can come and see how maple is produced. They can see what it looks like to have a commercial maple operation. They can taste all sorts of maple treats and all sorts of things. And then this year we also set up the Highland Maple Festival, which are the second and third weekends of March. So if you do that math, this past Saturday, we had folks scattered across 2 maple festivals. And so we set the mobile sugar shack up. It reached almost 600 people in Highland County. And then also we were manning a basic information booth inside. And so in addition to telling people where to go for, the bathroom and to get their tickets and stuff, we were also educating the public about best practices. We ran into a number of folks that are like backyard producers that are looking to scale up. And so for now, they are basically evaporating down on their stove in their kitchen, but they're interested in what the next step looks like. And so we educated a fair number of folks like that. We also ran a little bit of a research project. So we collected some data with Virginia Tech, who is focusing on the economic impact of Maple Day or of Maple Fest in Highland County and all sorts of things. The interesting thing that I want to point out about Mountain State Maple Days in particular is this was its 5th year. And this year we had a number of non-maple producers participate. And what I mean by that is the communities really got on board this year. And so we had a number of restaurants that were offering maple features, particularly in Pendleton and Pocahontas County, but all across the state, there were restaurants that were offering maple features, some for the whole month, some just for the weekend. We had a number of convention and visitors bureaus. So the folks that are on the ground, that are in charge of their local tourism plans, were actually engaged and putting out social media to engage folks to come here. And in some cases were part of the events. So it's pretty cool to see a community kind of adopt Maple Days and have it engaging both the farm producers as well as the communities that those farm producers are a part of. So another thing that we try to do, because agriculture is not a large part of West Virginia's economy, it's really not a large part of most of Central Appalachia's economy, is we try to do educational events that are geared towards kind of several different audiences, so that people start to see agriculture as an economic benefit, and in particular, agroforestry, and even at this point, maple and syrup production as part of their economy for their local location, or for their locations. And so we host in-person workshops regularly. So we host everything from, oh my gosh, I might know what a maple tree is, how do I get syrup out of it, which is kind of where I fall, all the way up to experts that are trying to scale up or trying to make their operations more successful. And so starting, I believe starting in a couple of days, so starting in a couple of days, we're having a sanitation workshop for maple producers on how to kind of close down for the season and how to make sure everything is clean and all sorts of ready for the next year. So we kind of spread the whole range. We host a webinar series that is our Out of the Woods webinar series that is geared towards the sugaring industry, but it includes things that intersect the sugaring industry. And so, for example, we had an entire webinar about utilizing maple and utilizing syrups in craft beverages. And so we invited some folks that are in the craft beverage industry to actually come and talk about how they use maple with their products that they're making at their restaurants, and kind of so on and so on. And so what that webinar series does is it's focused for the sugar industry, but they are actually seeing where their products are intersecting with, beyond just somebody buying a thing of maple syrup from the grocery store. They're starting to see where their products intersect with other industries, which will help kind of build sustainability and build financial opportunities for them. We regularly do school field days. Sometimes this is us all showing up at a school and having a whole bunch of hands-on activities. Sometimes it is Dr. Recklin going and talking to a team of 6th graders. So these are high exposure events. And so these are events where kids learn that maple syrup is a thing, you get it from trees, and here's how the state has played a role in maple syrup. You know, out of these, we don't necessarily get kids that are like, I want to be a maple producer. But we get are kids that are excited about it and think that it might be something, they see it as a career opportunity, they see it as an opportunity for later in high school, for jobs, etc. And then the last piece that I'll talk about is we operate the Maple Certificate course. Initially, it was for West Virginia maple producers. However, it has expanded. It is virtual. We have had an in-person component in the past. COVID sort of stopped that. But in the past 5 years, Kate and crew have reached over 100 people who are now able to at least know the science behind tapping and know the basic production of how to tap and then how to get syrup from tap. In the following years, we are going to expand that to have an advanced certificate course as well. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about as far as current opportunities and current things that we're working on. So in Appalachia, the average age of the farmer has just kept increasing. So we are fairly, as a population, we are fairly old compared to other regions in the world, but also our farmer population is even older. And so I'm not sure what it is for specifically just for maple producers, but right now the average age of a farmer in West Virginia is hovering between the 65 and 70-year-old mark. And so if you guys do the math, our workforce is aging, and we do not necessarily have folks that are coming in to take their place because that number keeps going up. And so a big part of what we're focusing on in the future is, and kind of starting now, is kind of growing this idea of a maple workforce. So growing this thought that, you know, if students are exposed in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grades to agroforestry, and maple is an opportunity, and you know it's a really short season, it's only 6 to 8 weeks here, you can earn a considerable amount of money in that 6 to 8 weeks. If we take all that at elementary school, and middle school, we give them an entrepreneurship experience where they actually learn like what a business plan is and things like that. by the time they're in high school or they've graduated from high school, they're able to maybe not pick up and just immediately run and start a maple operation, but they could work for another maple producer. They could help a maple producer actually expand the number of taps that producer is able to utilize each year, or they could lease trees from that producer to actually have their own small maple operation with a little bit of support from a mentor farmer. And then they would graduate into having their own maple operation, or, banding together to have their own maple operation. So these are just pictures from an activity this past week at Snowshoe. For example, we also work with a lot of partners to make this happen. So at Snowshoe Ski Resort, they operate Nature's Mountain Classroom, which is a way to get kids engaged in the outdoor recreation industry. And so we were asked to come in with second graders who they ski part-time, and then they learn about forestry and maple syrup the rest of the time. And so for 6 weeks, this is what they do, which is pretty cool. And then we got to go in for the last day. So they got to hear from a maple producer. So that's Adam Taylor, who's one of our amazing maple producers in the state. They got to sort of see what it looks like to tap a tree. And they got to try it themselves. And then I got to taste a whole bunch of different kinds of syrup. And so the biggest thing we learned is that if we ever want to really market our alternative syrups, so our walnut or sycamore syrups, we should have second graders write all the lines, because they were very enthusiastic about it. Okay, so what I want to wrap up with is kind of expanding on our successes. And so you've heard about a lot of what we've done. Here's where we're pointed to start to scale our seeds. And so as Kate and I both alluded to, our next focus is on agroforestry as a whole. So maple and tree syrups are a subset of a larger set of products that could be available from your forest. And so we are transitioning and bringing all of the syrup work with us into what we're referring to as woodland economies. And so we are building an assessment tool for service providers. We've identified that one of the biggest weaknesses in the region is that we have a lot of service providers out there who may be able to do things like identify trees, or may even be able to, help somebody learn how to produce ginseng, et cetera. But what they don't know is kind of how that whole system plays together, or how to transition from I can produce this into how do I coach somebody on economic development. And so we're building that assessment tool that they can use with their landowners. We're going to have to go through the same process of market assessment and development with each of these non-timber and et cetera forest products. Joey is helping us create a support network, both for those that are directly tied into the agroforestry industry, so our foresters and our folks like that, but also for the folks that are maybe you wouldn't think of as being part of the system, but really are. So our nonprofit groups that are actually trying to help push some of this forward, our funding agencies, so our banks and our lenders that would be helping with land acquisition for landowners, et cetera. So kind of if we can get them all in the room together and get them start to talk and start to work together, then we can have some real impact on our landowners in the region. And then support for landowners and transitioning from this big push of, can I grow it in my woods? So production, and you might be able to grow it there, but will it really make enough money for me to justify growing it? So we want our landowners to start to make decisions based on, can I make an income from this, more so than, well, I can grow it and I think it'll look cool while I grow it. Well, if you spend more money actually putting the thing in, so if you spend more money planting a bunch of ramp seed than you would actually get from harvesting the ramps, then that is not a nature-based enterprise for you. That is a hobby. And so we're trying to help people make decisions based on economics. The next key area to expand on is our value-added work. And so Kate didn't talk about it, but we ended up, Future Generations wrote the regulatory manual and came up with the regulatory requirements for maple for West Virginia. So the Department of Agriculture, in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture, but our state Department of Ag did not have any of these rules and regulations down, nor processes. And so we kind of came in alongside them and helped support them and actually built that regulatory manual that their inspectors are using. What has come up is now we can have maple syrup, but there's a whole layer beyond maple syrup of value added products that are not regulated. Well, they are regulated, but the manual doesn't exist and the how-to doesn't exist. And so we're about ready to dive into creating that manual for folks who want to make things like maple mustards, maple jams. Maple bacon jam is a big thing that needs to be regulated, but the process is complicated. And so we're working to try to simplify some of that for our folks. And then the last piece that we want to expand on is this. I'm calling it community-based outreach guidance, but this is basically taking what we've learned from watching Franklin get engaged this year and the work that our Convention of Visitors Bureau in Pocahontas County, which is the county just kind of southwest of Pendleton County, has snowshoe ski resort, but the work that they've done in engaging their local businesses and building up an entire Maple Days community beyond the producers, kind of document and come up with a series of best practices, and then start to work with other communities around the state where there are producers kind of centered. And so, for example, we've got 4 producers really between Wayne and Lincoln counties, and there's 2 communities that with restaurants and with local businesses in that area that could be building up Maple Days and could be actually, the restaurants could be making more money during Maple Days if they bought into the idea. And also the producers could be making more money and have more visits if folks who went to the restaurants were then told about Maple Days. And so kind of systematizing that and then starting to work with communities to build out that so that next year's Maple Days is even bigger. All right, do we have any questions?
Well, so let me just thank you, Jenny and Kate, and definitely please people fire away questions. They can be, if you want to have a question about how to make maple syrup, you've got the right people on the call, but also obviously if you have other programmatic questions, this is a great snapshot, especially of the evolution of kind of maple and kind of and now to beyond maple to agroforestry. And one thing that we certainly also have plans and aspirations to do, and actually current funding to do, is this really gave a snapshot of what we've been doing in West Virginia specifically as our home state, as our base state. It's certainly where all of this is radiating outward from, but it's also for folks to know that we really are preview for the Appalachian residential in June, moving to really having an Appalachian wide focus. And I think that was, for me, it was really exciting to be down at Highland County and just be, as we start to work much more closely across the border in Virginia and Maryland and Kentucky and Ohio, all of which are really, and especially the role of partnerships as we start to see this work expand in size and scope here in our home state, but also in its reach across the broader region. But once again, thank you, Jenny and Kate, for a wonderful presentation. And I'm sure there are some folks with questions.
I actually have a comment, just a fun fact about the region and the history of maple syrup, and especially these festivals that we supported more actively this year. It is the 5th year for the Mountain State Maple Days. Again, as Jenny mentioned, February 3rd Saturday in February, 3rd Saturday in March. It was the 62nd Maple Festival in Highland County. And this was honestly, we have guesstimates of the economic impact. We, Future Generations, and our partner Virginia Tech, were actually able to bring people on site to be doing that economic impact assessment. And I look forward to getting to know the results of that, because it is such a huge, we know that it brings a huge economic boon to Highland County. We know it just from casual conversation, but to get real numbers is going to be amazing after 62 years.
I think from the screen, I know that Laura from our international audience has a question, and there may be others before we go around the room here from the international team, Laura, and then maybe others who come in.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations on this great work, great presentations, and gee, wish you much success in this. And so my question was about if you're promoting the health angle of maple syrup, because maple syrup is actually healthier than sugar. I mean, I was just looking it up. I'm not an expert on it, but it's sweeter than sugar, so you can use less. They also say you shouldn't use, add maple syrup to your diet in addition, because you're just adding, if you already have sugar or baseline sugar. But if you replace sugar with maple syrup, you can actually have a net improvement in health from less fructose, which adds to your cholesterol levels. And so basically, it's a less bad version of sugar. And, if people knew that. Also, the other issue is organic. Are you promoting this as an organic product? Do you have organic certification? Can you get that?
So I'll jump in on this one, Laura, and specifically, I want to give a shout out or preview to everybody show up to the Out of the Woods session in May, when we are going to have North America's leading nutritionist who is studying the nutritional benefits of maple and sucrose-based sugars over the more traditional or processed sugars, certainly cane sugars. And we're really, really excited to have that, because to answer your question, we are certainly trying, we promote that, we talk about it, but specifically, we're trying to get more of that information in the hands of producers so that they can really be using it and marketing and speaking to that. We have not advanced the maple syrup by definition is an organic process. We are actually discouraging people from going and certifying themselves as organic because currently it doesn't show the economic return in the marketplace, despite the fact that, so there's two questions. Are they organic practices versus are you certified organic? And we know that maple sugaring is organic. There is no reason to be using pesticides in your woods and that sort of thing. But we also see that the $5,000 annual certification fee to become organic tends to eat up all of our local producers' actual return on investment. So hopefully I've answered, but please do come. That May webinar should be great. I've been waiting to hear Navindra speak for over a year because I'm really interested in this topic as well.
What is the name of the person? I'm sorry.
His name is Navindra. I'm blanking on his last name, but it will be on May 19th. And if you go on to our Future.edu/research and look under the Maple program or register for our monthly webinar series, you will see him on the presentation schedule. And that's May 19th at 7 o'clock Eastern time.
Okay, thank you. 7 p.m. Okay.
Yeah, it was
Thank
just feedback, really. I mean, you two should never lose, from a communications point of view, community engagement, that energy that you have now in the burgeoning stages of it. I mean, how long is this? 2 years, did you say? But I mean, this is every single point there. And, Johan, you have sat through a lot of these over the years. This is fantastic. So my main piece of this is to say, don't lose this sort of early energy that you have, both of you, because that just knocked everything out of the park. I've seen professionals who have not been able to do that from the way that you guys just have there. So kudos on that. And then I suppose what I wanted to ask from another, are you trying to replicate the messaging for this and the scope of it for the SDLCs abroad in terms of sort of like a best practice methodology, or is that for too much further down the line in the future?
Certainly there is a an exchange that we want to cultivate. Now, obviously, each one needs to respond to its local.
Locally available
where it
resources,
is,
but I mean
exactly, where we are
the,
already, but what we are very much trying to lift up is the process and the synergy across these, as far as this key function of that each SDLC's purpose is to create a network of action, learning, and experimentation through the cultivation of partnerships. And I think that final piece, you can kind of say, okay, there are two sides of the dialectic, but what kind of puts them into that, what starts the feedback loop, and the nurturing and cultivation of partnerships. And this, because this goes right back to the fundamental learning of the original seed skill task force that at times we've gotten away from in institution building, but is that sustainable growth occurs when true partnerships, that growth through partnerships is the sustainable form
Yeah.
of growth, according to our original research.
I'd like to follow on. This is really a terribly important question for the future generation's future. Most organizations in their communications messaging promote and advertise themselves. What we're trying to do with the SDLCs and the whole idea of scale squared is to action learning and research. In other words, whatever you know now through research and experimentation can be improved and can be localized. And through the action learning, it's the process of letting other people take advantage of that learning and use it in their work. So this is a different shift, and it's very appropriate to the role of a university, because the universities do research and they do educational extension. But how we're now trying to use the SDLC concept to localize this growth of knowledge and this extension of knowledge is exactly what we're trying to figure out how to do. And I think that we've had massive success with maple syrup, a niche market, but this niche market moving into alternative products now, as they're doing with agroforestry, is an example of what we would like to do in other SDLCs around the world. And for instance, in Nepal, on nature conservation, forest user groups, and on with community health and the extension of health. So how can future generations localize an ongoing process of experimentation and applied learning? And that's where we've made real progress. That's what the Bending Bamboo was trying to do in Vietnam. That's what Cheeto's work in Africa was trying to do with some of her women's work and with honey. And so we've seen that in several other countries, but now we're trying to formalize that.
Yeah, and what I would, just to build on that, because we keep kind of, it's this distinction, and I can't underscore enough the importance for everyone in thinking beyond maple syrup. Obviously, it's been a great success. It's a great success story for us. But I got that question a few years ago from people around the state, even internally, of what are you going to do after syrup? Is it going to be honey? Is it going to be, and my basic point was, obviously we had a number of right conditions happen with the maple syrup industry, but future generations didn't necessarily, aside from some research, that the magic wasn't in the maple. As wonderful a product as maple is, and don't get me started on that, I could go for a while, but the secret formula for future generations was the method and process we brought to bear. And that really, obviously, as everyone knows, is seed scale, but it's specifically the working, as Kate was saying, from day one, creating an association, working with state government, is really cultivating partnerships. And what future generations is very good at doing is the sidestep, is bringing in the horizontal connections that are often overlooked. And we see the same thing while we may be starting our work in the Nepal SDLC, which hopefully everyone will come hear about next fourth Tuesday staff meeting. We'll hear from our Nepal SDLC. But is what we keep seeing is what future generations brings to bear is our ability to connect real good local expertise in specific areas together and bring these different isolated parts together into a system that is able to be much more impactful. And so as we all think and you understand what the SDLCs are, these are not extension projects. This is not technical training projects that are sector specific. The strength in the SDLC model lies in our ability to be collaborative and diversified, because the goal that we're seeking is really interdependence across these regions.
Well, folks, we are at the 1 hour point. I want to thank everybody from the Appalachian team. Fantastic to share this work. I'm really proud. And let me just say that on this last fundraising trip that I was on last week, I took out little samples of maple and sycamore and infused chili pepper little bottles. And I've never had a gift that I've handed out to potential donors that was as powerful as opening this little box that had all these little bottles in it, nestled in maple shavings to keep the bottles protected, and then hand it to a billionaire and say, "Don't you think you want to give us some money?" It's a sweet gift. It's better than the swag that we used to give out. So I'm very optimistic, actually, about a number of new projects that we will be coming up with. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And please do join next month for when we hear about the good work that's unfolding in Nepal. And everybody, please stay safe. Keep your masks on and keep up the good work. Thanks, everybody.
And those are maple donuts for anybody.
Yeah.
Other Dan Rosen is your question.
Yeah.
Dan.
Kate and Jenny have been.
Oh, good. Okay.
But
I didn't want to.
Maybe Dan ask you. Dan, do you want to speak?
No,
Dan, if you
well,
want to
I would just repeat what I've written there, that I've been acutely aware of agroforestry for 30 years and believed in it. But I know that, like at ICRAF in Nairobi, they did agroforestry for 15 years before they really looked at the economics of it. And, it's just not going to happen unless you can present it, unless you understand the economics from the producer's point of view. And it is, from an economic point of view, preferable to an alternative use of that forest. And I've just seen it time and time again, not emphasized. And I think that it would be something that would be useful for future generations to get in that on the ground. From an Appalachian point of view, what are the livelihood advantages of this versus other uses?
Well, Dan, and if anybody wants to leave, let me just say leave. I want to pick this up on it, because one of the conversations I had in California was indirectly related to several people who are very concerned about how to promote economic advantages of keeping forests. And we're talking about people who are billionaires. And you're sitting in the Amazon, in the center of the Amazon's highest biodiversity there in Bolivia. I don't need to tell you that. And you're trying to make money off the Amazon jungle by making chocolate, which is a forest product. Now, I think that there is, as a business opportunity for future generations, something here that we have touched on with the Appalachian Project. You've certainly been doing it for decades in the Amazon forests. Our team in Nepal is working in national parks, trying to figure out how to make money. So I think that we need to figure out how to do this, because as the world is engaging with this climate change, the basic argument you just made is a business opportunity for future generations that's worth millions and may help the planet.
So I'll just jump on that, and Daniel, because of one point you just said, which is, I don't think it's, I think the emphasis needs to be on, we already are to a very real extent. If you look at our collective impact, if you look at both the historical work, such as Dan Robeson's or Mike Reckland's or Tom Hammett's, that has very much created the foundation for where agroforestry is as a sector, very much the way that Carl Taylor's and Rita Tapa's has really laid a foundation for where primary healthcare is. And so I don't think I think that I agree 100% with Dan that what we are seeing is the time is right for this information, and the critical need again and again and again in agroforestry is framing it as an economic sector and not just an environmental conservation thing. That is what the underlying point or topic that the SDLC is addressing in this creating this network is that. And we're starting, as you just said, Daniel and Dan, we've seen this again and again. Kate, did you want to jump on that? Good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, as a syrup enthusiast and nerd, it's, oh, that's not working. Okay,
I
it's
can hear
on.
you.
Thank
Good,
you.
good.
As a syrup nerd and enthusiast, I think the beauty of maple syrup is because it's such a long-standing industry across North America. There's actually been a lot of economic workups done on different types of syrup operations. So there's actually a lot of this baseline data out there. So it has allowed us to have a starting point that's not zero and adjust it to Appalachia. So we've done a lot of work on estimating like return on investment times, all kinds of like helping people spitball how much money might an operation take. But then from there, we can actually spin out sort of those spreadsheets and those calculations into other NTFPs and other forest products. So it's kind of the beauty with starting with a forest product that has a long-standing profitable history is that, honestly.
And to build on what Kate's saying is we actually have farmers down the road from us here in West Virginia and over the line in Virginia and Highland County who have their families have been managing the same woodlots for 150 and a couple examples that we know that they've been managing woodlots for 200 years for syrup production, for commercial syrup production. So we have those numbers, and then we have the industry standard numbers countrywide or industry-wide and using modern technologies. And so we're able to overlap that information, the economic data and the ecology data. And then we also are working with partners who specialize in forest botanicals, for example. And we are working with them to overlap economic data because we know that ROIs on specific forest medicinals that are a slower growing crop are sometimes 10 years at best. And if we can overlap functions and do understory and tree cropping, then we're looking at actually getting an ROI from, for example, syrup production that is a break even in 3 years, and then starting to use your actual income, additional income after year 3 to install your understory crop that then has a 10-year turnaround time. And so we're able to stack those functions economically at this point in our work with our partners.
Dan, thanks very much for joining, but I think that this point you made here at the end is really important for us to feed in as we're going forward here strategically for our global forest engagement. And I know Luke is already doing that with Paul, but I'm sure that the folks in Appalachia would love to hear it as well with their jungle. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you all a little bit later in various meetings.